My name is Mike Nunn, and I'd like to thank Jeannie and Bractlet for sponsoring this talk. Now, today, I'm going to be discussing with you the newest features in React. So to get started, let's just talk a little bit about what React is. React is a popular JavaScript library for building user interfaces, and it was created by Facebook in 2013. The core concept of React is to build reusable components and efficiently update the user interface whenever state changes occur in the application. React was created to provide a more efficient, modular, and maintainable approach to building UIs, particularly for large-scale applications with complex UI requirements. You may look at the fact that React has only been around for 10 years and think to yourself how young of a technology it is. But as Dan Abramov, a contributor to React, recently stated, React will soon be 10 years old. In JavaScript years, it's like a whole century. His quote speaks to the ever-evolving landscape of front-end libraries and frameworks going in and out of popularity. React, however, took over as the most popular front-end framework years ago and has not let up. Looking at the graph, you can see that it is downloaded almost 4 times as much as its main competitors, Vue and Angular. In order to stay on top and compete, React needs to continuously update, improve, and innovate its core features. The most recent major update was React version 18.0, which was released in late March of 2022. So for those of you who have been building in React, even if you haven't noticed some of the core updates, I'm sure you probably at least noticed a small change in how we render our app. Specifically, we're now using the new root API, as can be seen on the right with create root. This seemingly small addition to your application allows you to opt into the most important addition to React 18, and that is concurrent rendering. Concurrent rendering, or simply concurrency, is not exactly a feature. It's more of a behind-the-scenes implementation that will allow you to prepare multiple versions of your UI at the same time. Now, if I were to ask you about the most important factors in user experience, the concept of rendering should be one that comes to mind. The faster the rendering, the better the feeling of an app is. One change that concurrency brings is that rendering can now be interruptible. Previous to React 18, all rendering was synchronous, meaning that once an update starts rendering, it won't stop until the user sees the result on the screen. However, now React can start rendering an update, pause it at a certain point, and then continue it later or even abandon it altogether. Now with concurrency comes some new features. The ones we're going to be talking about today are suspense, transition, and automatic batching. Suspense is a feature that lets you declaratively specify the loading state for a part of the component tree if it's not yet ready to be displayed. Essentially, it allows components to interrupt or suspend rendering in order to wait for some asynchronous resource, such as data, images, or code to be loaded. So if we were to have a component load to the page that contained a bunch of comments that we fetched from, say, some API or database, we could wrap it in a suspense component where it will be suspended until it's finished loading and ready to be shown to the page. We would also specify a fallback to appear in place of the component we are waiting for. In this case, we would show a spinner. Now, we may also suspend multiple components at the same time by wrapping both in a suspense component. This will show a single loading state up until both components are ready, at which point all of the content will render after everything has successfully loaded. Now the comments component and other content component will both be suspended until both of them are ready to be re-rendered. You can also decide to be more granular about your loading UI and wrap suspense components around smaller or individual parts of your component tree. So with this code, if we look at the very bottom, we still have our spinner that is going to be showing in the UI until comments and other content are ready. But we also have this waiting to load text that is going to be showing in place of our left column, while that remains separately suspended. And also we have other elements on the page, such as the title and the subtitle, that are unaffected by the suspense components and will render to the page right away. What is so powerful about this is that we allow other components to be rendered earlier as they become ready. In our example, by separately wrapping comments and other content under their own suspense, we're allowing left column to render as soon as it becomes ready, which might be earlier than when the other sections become ready. This idea of suspense gives us much more control than ever over how our UI is displayed to the user. Now, another concept within concurrent rendering is transitions. And transitions allow us to distinguish between urgent and non-urgent updates. Urgent updates like typing, clicking, or pressing need immediate response because if there's a delay or lag in these actions, it can feel wrong or out of sync with our expectations. However, transitions are different because the user doesn't expect to see every intermediate value on screen. For example, when you select a filter in a dropdown, you expect the filter button itself to respond immediately when you click, indicating that your selection has been registered. However, the actual results or changes that come from that may transition separately. A small delay would be imperceptible and often expected. And if you change the filter again before the results are done rendering, you only care to see the latest results. So let's look at an example here without transitions. So we have 3 tabs in our app. We have About, Posts, and Contact. And when we click on Posts or Contact, it's going to display some information right here. Now, within our code, we are declaring a tab state and initializing it to About. We also have a select tab function that will be invoked when we click on a tab. And this is going to update our tab state accordingly. So if we were to click on the Posts tab, it's going to display all of our posts. Now, there was about a 1-second delay because there was a lot of data to be loaded and displayed to the interface. So what happens if we click on Posts and then Contact right afterwards? That 1-second delay is still there. And that's because React wants to finish loading all of the posts before it takes care of showing the contact information. Now, let's see this app in action if we add in transitions. The only thing that's changed is we've wrapped our set tab in start transition, and we're going to tell React that this update is non-urgent. So just like before, when we click on posts, all the posts will be loaded to the page and there's a delay. But now when we click on posts and immediately click on contact, there's no delay because React knows that it can completely interrupt the post from loading and just stop it and immediately render to the UI the contact information because that is urgent. Now, our third new feature is automatic batching. And this is the process of grouping together multiple state updates into a single render, which results in better performance. A way to think of automatic batching is, imagine you're at a restaurant with some friends and you order some food. It wouldn't make sense for you to give the waitress your order, and then she goes back to the kitchen to place her order, then comes back to the table to take the next person's order, then goes back to the kitchen and repeats that process for everybody. Instead, she'll get all of the orders at once and go to the kitchen just one time. Now, previously, batched updates happened, but they only happened inside React event handlers. So for example, let's say you have a button, and when you click it, it will invoke the handle click function, which has multiple state updates. Those state updates were always batched together, so you only rendered once. But what if inside that handle click function, we fetch some data? Well, let's take a look. Here in this app, we're declaring 3 states: count, Boolean, and name. And then we're going to render to the UI a button that we're going to click on, which is going to show our count and our name. And there's also this log events component that I'll get into. Now, when we click on the button, that's going to invoke the handle click function, which will log click to the console, and it's going to fetch some data and then update our 3 states. Now, if we look at our log events component that I mentioned, it's simply going to log render to the console so that we can see exactly how many times our app is re-rendering. Then at the bottom, we can also see that we are not opting into React 18 concurrency. So when we click on the next button and we look at the console, we can see that render was logged 3 times. That's because there was a re-render on each state update. Now, if we look at this same code, with the only difference being that now we're using the create root method and thus have automatic batching, if we were to click on the next button and then look at the console, we can see that render only appears 1 time. That's because all 3 of our state updates were batched together, which makes our app more performant. So in every application, speed and user friendliness have always been extremely important goals. With concurrent rendering, we are a step further to speeding up our apps and moving to a higher level of user satisfaction. And this is because with those new features, we can now batch state updates everywhere, mark certain updates as non-urgent, and suspend rendering of certain components. Now, there are also some features that React is working on that are not quite ready to be rolled out yet, but I do want to just briefly mention them, and these are off-screen and server components. Off-screen is a React component that will allow you to prepare new UI elements in the background so that they're ready before the user even reveals them. For instance, let's say that clicking on a button will make a change to the UI. Off-screen can make it so that once the user starts to hover over that button, the new UI elements will begin to preload in anticipation of the user clicking on the button. So when the button is actually clicked, there will be an extremely fast update to the UI. Now, server components is an upcoming feature that allows developers to build apps that span both the server and client, combining the interactivity of client-side apps with the improved performance of traditional server rendering. This is going to minimize the amount of data that needs to be transferred between the server and the client, thus reducing latency and improving performance. And I highly suggest that if you want to learn more about this interesting feature, that you watch the excellent tech talk that was recently presented by my colleague, Kinsky Wu. So that's everything that I have for the newest React features. And I'm sorry, but I don't believe we will have any time for questions. But I hope you all learned something of value today. And here are some of the resources that I utilized. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss React anytime. Thank you.